My husband is cooking for his true love when his parents are abducted. I don't stop him from doing anything. Instead, I call the police. I've been reborn. In my past life, I stopped my husband from caring for his true love. In turn, he stopped his parents from leaving the house, helping them avoid a tragedy. However, his true love ended up getting an amputation after cutting her finger and getting a wound infection. My husband didn't blame me after the incident. His revenge only came a year later when I was almost due for labor. He tricked me to a remote cliff and pushed me off. Nothing would have happened to Haley if you hadn't stopped me that night. This is all your fault. Why is she the one who had to have an amputation? You're the one who deserves to die, you evil woman. I rolled down the cliff while pregnant with his child and died a horrible death. This time, he leaves the house to care for his true love as he wishes. But when he returns, he falls to his knees in despair. He looks like he's aged a decade. I received a call from the abductors just as my husband's first love, Haley Crosby, arrived at the scene. You have an hour to gather $20 million, the abductor barked at me. Place the ransom under the central bridge. Don't call the police, or I'll kill them. Armed with the knowledge from my past life, I put the call on the speaker so my husband, Shane McClure, could hear them. I turned to face him and met his clouded expression. He snorted. Natalie Swanson, how low could you go? Did you get my parents to put on this act just so you could push Haley out of the picture? I didn't cry or wail like he had expected. Instead, I calmly clarified. This isn't an act. Your parents have been abducted, and we need $20 million to pay the ransom. Go get the money now. His icy gaze bore into me. Stone-faced, he said. Are you trying to swindle my money after you failed to win my heart with this sham marriage? Shane and I had known each other for 2 decades. When we were younger, I saved his life once, and our families arranged our marriage as a result. But deep down, I'd always known Shane resented my modest family background. He had never hidden his feelings for Haley Crosby, his first love, who had been studying abroad. Before we got married, I told him he could walk away, that he could return to Haley if he wished. I promised I wouldn't hold it against him. Without even looking at me, he muttered flatly, I'll marry you willingly. Shane's demeanor grew colder after our wedding. He had never looked me in the face from the first time we met. I often comforted myself and attributed his coldness to his personality, that he still loved me. Then Haley returned to the country. Shane's wide, radiant smile upon seeing her shattered my delusions and drove a knife into my heart. From the beginning, he had never once taken my side. The look in my eyes frosted over, and I glared at him in utter disappointment. Keeping my composure, I said evenly, I've never thought of conning you, and I'd never resort to such a shameless tactic. Believe me or not, your parents have been abducted. I'm not putting on an act. Go to the police with me if you trust me. If not, get out of my way. I have lives to save. He seemed taken aback, maybe by my calmness, or maybe because, for the first time, I showed real irritation. I turned to leave, gently pushing Haley out of my way. But suddenly, she collapsed to the floor. That hurts. Haley whimpered. She blinked her eyes with an innocent look as tears streamed down her cheeks. Shane, don't be angry at Nat, she said. She didn't shove me on purpose. Shane's face darkened as he rushed to her side. She was grimacing and clutching her hand. It was at that moment I realized I had suffered a cut to my hand. Shane bellowed at me. I'll kill you if anything happens to Haley. Then, he hurriedly brought her to the hospital, leaving me behind in our spacious bedroom. Even though the abductors had warned me not to call the police, I thought it over and decided to report it anyway. I decided to leave the task to the professionals. After making the report, I headed to the police station with long, determined strides. Before I got there, my phone rang with an incoming call. I frowned at the familiar name on the screen before picking up. Ugh, came the exasperated voice of Jimmy Fletcher, Shane's cousin. As usual, his tone was full of impatience. I see you're having fun making false police reports. What did Shane ever do to you? Why are you so pathetic? Shane's family had always looked down on me. The only ones who treated me kindly were his parents, and that was why I had to save them. Keeping my voice even, I asked, Jimmy, did Shane tell you I made a false police report? The silence on the other end was answer enough. I let out a cold chuckle. Jimmy, as a police officer, you're mocking me instead of responding to my plea for help. If you don't dispatch help, I'll lodge a complaint against you. Jimmy didn't even bother to act professionally. His voice roared through the phone. Marrying Shane doesn't make you better than anyone else. You're nothing but a small-town loser. You're like a curse to our family. If I were you, I'd have offed myself. If Haley hadn't gone abroad, do you think Shane would have ever married you? Don't kid yourself, you pathetic woman. You don't even deserve to be Haley's replacement. I ended the call expressionlessly and filed another police report, this time making sure to include a formal complaint against Jimmy. At the police station, I explained the whole situation to the officers. I told them how Shane's parents had been abducted and provided them with the recording of the abductors' call as well as the phone number they had used. The tech team quickly got to work, but they soon hit a wall. The recording revealed the abductor had used a voice modulator, and the phone number was unregistered. They couldn't call back, nor could they track its location. I have $10 million in my account. That should help us get started, I said as I reached for my credit card. However, my face darkened instantly. My credit card had been cut in half, and the funds had been frozen by Shane. Taking a deep breath, I called my secretary at the company. How much cash can we liquidate and transfer within 10 minutes? I asked. $15 million, she replied. Good. Transfer it to me immediately. Since tracking the abductors wasn't an option, the only choice was to meet their demands. $20 million was no small sum, but it was a price worth paying if it meant saving Shane's parents. Still $5 million short, I quickly reviewed my options and dialed Craig Fletcher, Shane's uncle. Uncle Craig, Shane's parents have been abducted. We're still $5 million short of the ransom. Could you lend it to me? I'll repay you as soon as they're safe. Craig gasped in shock. Has my sister been abducted? Does Shane know about this? I sighed and replied calmly. I told him, but he doesn't believe me. He's at the hospital with Haley right now. You're the only one who can help me. Stay right where you are. I'll transfer the money right away. As soon as Craig hung up, the abductors called again. Time's up. Where's the money? My heart sank, but I kept my tone as even as possible. It's almost ready. Please just give me a little more time. You'll get every penny you asked for. The abductor's voice grew impatient. Come over with the $20 million now. Not a cent less, or I'll kill them. Fighting to keep my emotions in check, I said, just 30 more minutes. If my in-laws are still alive, I promise you'll get the full amount. No sooner had I finished speaking than I heard Shane's parents wailing hysterically in the background. The abductor's voice turned icy and venomous. If the money doesn't arrive within 30 minutes, you'll be collecting their bodies. After the call ended, the police shook their heads grimly. Even though the abductor had directly contacted me, it was still impossible to trace their location. I turned around and saw Jimmy passing by. He had overheard everything and now looked as pale as a ghost. Nat, have Shane's parents really been kidnapped? But Shane told me they were just acting to help you. I didn't have the energy to argue with him, so I told him to call Shane and tell him the truth. I anxiously glanced at the time. With Craig's resources, transferring $5 million shouldn't take this long. After waiting for a while, I called him. Uncle Craig. I had barely begun when he sighed heavily. Nat, lying is wrong, you know, he said tiredly. Look, no one in Shane's family has treated you kindly except for his parents. I pitied you and tried to help you. But now I see things clearly. Those who play the victim only end up looking pathetic. If you weren't such a compulsive liar, a fine man like Shane wouldn't have come to resent you. My heart sank into my stomach. I knew now that there was no chance of scraping together the remaining $5 million. Uncle Craig, did Shane tell you I was faking this? My voice trembled with urgency. You may not believe me, but the police are standing right next to me. They can vouch for everything I'm saying. Craig interrupted with another deep sigh. You don't need to hire fake police officers to trick me. Even if you manage to fool me today, you can't deceive yourself forever. Nat, I know you're unwilling to let Shane go because you love him, but he has someone he cares about. And now she's back. Why not just divorce him if this is too painful for you? I hung up midway through his rambling, my expression dark and stormy. Shane's parents' lives were hanging by a thread, yet their own family took this crisis as an opportunity to attack me. Meanwhile, Jimmy finally got through to Shane's phone. Shane, listen to me. This is serious. Your parents have really been abducted. The police. Before he could finish, Haley's lazy voice came through. Jimmy, are you playing along with Natalie's act now too? Tell me, how much is she paying you? I'll double it. Jimmy grew emotional. I'm not lying. Haley, uninterested, handed the phone to Shane. Shane, Jimmy's been bought off by that wretched woman too. Shane's cold voice sounded next. Jimmy, stop it. Jimmy's voice cracked. He was on the verge of tears. Shane, your parents are in real danger. You need to transfer $5 million to Nat's account now. Shane scoffed. So it's about money after all. Tell Natalie to stop this pathetic act. She's lost her mind. And what did Haley ever do to her? The call abruptly ended. He'd hung up. Left with no other options, I forced a bitter smile and turned to the police. Let's go. Even if I don't have the full amount, I have to go. I'll lure the abductor myself. That's too dangerous, the police officer protested. I lowered my gaze. What if the abductor knows me? They might get suspicious if you take my place. I reached Central Bridge as quickly as I could. The abductor called just as I arrived. Where's the money? My voice trembled uncontrollably against the howling wind. I left the money under the bridge. Release them now. Where are they? The abductor sounded indifferent. They're in the rundown apartment across from the bridge. Room 301. I sprinted to room 301. The stench of blood hit me like a wave as soon as I reached the door. My heart pounded wildly. I had a sense of foreboding. following the trail of blood to the door that was slightly ajar. I pushed it open and nearly collapsed at the sight inside. Shane's parents, Donald McClure and Jane Fletcher, lay on the floor, their abdomens punctured, blood gushing out from those gaping wounds. Sobbing, I tried to press against their wounds with my clothes, but Jane weakly pushed my hand away. It's too late, Nat. Tears blurred my vision as I clutched her hand tightly. I've called 911. The police are on their way too. Please don't die. I'm sorry, it's my fault. I didn't get the money in time. I wasted too much time. Jane smiled faintly, as if even that required all the strength she had left. This isn't your fault. The abductor never planned to release us. You've suffered so much over the years. Shane owes you far too much. Divorce him. Everything we own will go to you. Go live your life, Nat. A thought struck me, and my hands trembled as I fumbled for my phone to call Shane. Hang on, please. Just hold on a little longer. I'll make Shane come and see you. But every call went unanswered. Shane had blocked me. I sent him a message, telling him his parents were critically injured and begging him to come immediately, but he didn't respond. The light in my in-laws' eyes gradually faded until it was gone. They had stopped breathing. I cried so hard it felt like my heart was shattered. My vision blurred to the point where I couldn't see. Miss Swanson, are you all right? The police had arrived. They stared at the two lifeless bodies on the floor in stunned silence. I felt myself swaying. The world was spinning around me. A police officer came up to support me with a conflicted expression. Miss Swanson, we've arrested the abductor. We also recovered the ransom money. His eyes flickered as he whispered apologetically, I'm sorry. We're late to the rescue. Please accept our condolences. The air inside the county morgue was thick with the scent of formaldehyde, old brick, and a freezing, sterile draft that seemed to cling to the walls. I stood beside the twin stainless steel tables, my hands folded quietly in front of my dark gray trench coat. On the tables, beneath the white, institutional sheets lay Donald and Jane. Their faces were pale, their features relaxed into an icy, unbothered peace, the final stillness of people who had spent their last breaths trying to protect me. Net. A shaky, broken whisper broke the silence of the corridor. Jimmy Fletcher stood in the doorway, his head wrapped in a hasty white bandage, his police uniform rumpled and stained with gray dust. He looked pale, his eyes bloodshot and swollen. He took a half step into the room, his knees trembling so violently he had to grip the edge of the metal doorframe to keep from falling. I called Shane, Jimmy whispered, his voice cracking. I called him 50 times. He finally picked up. He still thought it was a prank. He told me to tell you that if we didn't stop harassing him, he would have my badge revoked. I didn't look at him. I reached out, my fingers gently brushing against the cold, stiff hand of my mother-in-law Jane. Your badge is already under review, Jimmy, I said, my voice quiet, flat, and entirely devoid of the trembling hysteria I had carried for 20 years. The formal complaint I filed against you for neglecting an emergency kidnapping report has been processed by the Internal Affairs Division. You don't need Shane to revoke it. Jimmy fell to his knees on the linoleum floor, his face buried in his hands as his shoulders shook with violent, quiet sobs. I'm sorry, Nat. He wept into his hands. I was a fool. I believed him. I believed Haley. Everyone believed Haley, I said softly, looking down at Jane's pale face. Because she is fragile. Because she has those big, innocent eyes. And because you all wanted to believe that I was the monster so you could feel comfortable treating me like one. The heavy double doors of the morgue were pushed open. Ethan McClure, my husband, the CEO of the McClure Group, the man who had spent 5 years treating me like an unwanted phantom, stood in the doorway. He was still wearing his custom-made suit, but his tie was crooked, his hair slightly disheveled. He looked around the cold, gray room, his eyes scanning the stainless steel tables until they landed on the white sheets. A sudden, sharp gasp of horror escaped his throat. Dad, Mom. He took 3 rapid, stumbling steps forward, his hands reaching out to pull the sheets back. No, he gasped, his fingers trembling as he touched Jane's cold cheek. No. Mom, wake up. It's Shane. I'm here. I'm here to take you home. They can't hear you, Shane, I said, my voice carrying the quiet, cool peace of the winter wind outside. You. He snapped his head toward me, his gray eyes bloodshot and wild with a terrifying, possessive rage. Natalie, what did you do? You said they were acting. You said. I told you they were abducted, Shane, I said, looking him dead in the eye. I put the call on speaker. I showed you the timeline. But you chose to believe Haley's cut finger was a matter of life and death. You chose to freeze my accounts, and you chose to tell your Uncle Craig that I was a compulsive liar, trying to swindle your money. I reached into my pocket and pulled out a small, blue folder, the unilateral divorce petition I had prepared last night. Because of your good intentions to protect Haley, we were $5 million dollars short of the ransom, I said, sliding the folder onto the metal table, beside my mother-in-law's body. The abductor killed them because the money didn't arrive on time. You killed them, Shane. With your own pride. The silence that followed was absolute, broken only by the low mechanical hum of the morgue's refrigerator units. Shane stood frozen, his hand still resting on Jane's cold forehead. The gray, sterile light of the room caught the sharp lines of his face, making him look old, hollowed out, and entirely empty. The money, he whispered, his eyes rolling in a sudden wild panic. I thought you were lying. I thought you wanted to buy that apartment in the South District. I have $15 million of my own, Shane, I said, my voice quiet. I didn't need your money. I never did. No, that's not true. You married me for my inheritance. My father is the chief director of the Orenburg shipping conglomerate. I said, looking at him with a thin, cold smile. I didn't tell you because you were always so proud of your modest startup. I didn't want you to feel insecure. But it appears your insecurity was a disease I couldn't cure. Shane's knees buckled. He fell back against the viewing table, his hands shaking so violently he had to grip the metal edge to keep from falling. His corporate suits, his private offices, his $3 billion valuation, it all looked like cheap painted cardboard in front of the two cold bodies on the table. Shane, the door opened, and his uncle Craig Fletcher walked in. Craig's face was entirely pale, his eyes wide with a deep silent horror as he looked at his sister's body. He didn't look at Shane with the usual warm, protective pride. He looked at him as if he were a stranger. The forensic report came back, Craig said, his voice shaking. The abductor. He confessed under interrogation. He said he had to kill them because the wire transfer was cancelled at 9:45. The wire transfer I cancelled because you told me it was a scam. Uncle Craig. Shane gasped, his hand reaching out. I didn't. No. Get your hands off me, Shane, Craig said, his voice dropping to a dangerous, low rumble. You spent 5 years playing the savior to another woman, and you let my sister die in a dark room because you wanted to prove your wife was a liar. You are no longer a Fletcher. And the company, I'm pulling all my shares. Today. He turned and walked out of the room, his boots making a sharp, echoing click against the tiles. The empire Shane had built was gone. And the moment his parents' eyes had closed, his home had turned into a cold, empty tomb. The reading of the will was held at the offices of the Vance law firm on Friday morning. The room was quiet, smelling of old leather, paper, and hot tea. I sat on the left side of the long mahogany table, my lawyer, Mr. Vance, sitting beside me, with a thick leather folder of financial statements. Shane sat opposite me, his face pale and sunken, his eyes bloodshot and hollow. He didn't have his legal team with him. His father's partners had already resigned from the board of directors, and his own mother's family had refused to pay his legal fees. Mr. McClure, Mr. Vance said, sliding a document across the table. This is the final will and testament of Donald McClure and Jane Fletcher, executed 3 years ago during their wedding anniversary. He pointed to a specific clause highlighted in yellow ink. According to Section 4, in the event of their simultaneous passing, 80% of the Sterling Group's majority shares, along with the title to the main villa and the private properties, are to be transferred solely to their daughter-in-law, Natalie Swanson. Mr. Shane McClure is to receive only the minimum statutory stipend of $10,000 a year. Shane's hand shook, the paper in his grip rustling loudly. 70%? But I'm their son. I'm the heir. You are the man who left them to die, Shane, I said, my voice quiet, flat, and entirely dead. They knew what you were. They knew about Haley. They knew about the fake medical reports you paid for 6 years ago to prove she was your mentor. They kept quiet because they hoped you would grow up. But you didn't. Natalie, please. He stood up from his chair, his hands reaching across the mahogany table to grab mine, his fingers trembling. We can start over. I'll fire Haley. I'll sell her penthouse. I'll give you everything, just don't sign the papers. I've already signed them, Shane, I said. And the $5 million you blocked last week? My father's corporation has already executed a clawback. Your personal properties, including the ones you bought for Haley, are currently being repossessed by the bank to cover the damages. The double doors of the boardroom were pushed open. 2 police officers in dark blue uniforms walked in, followed by Detective Henderson from the Orenburg Commercial Crimes Division. Shane McClure, the detective said, pulling a pair of steel cuffs from his belt. You are under arrest for accessory to corporate fraud, money laundering, and potential complicity in the homicide of Donald McClure. You have the right to remain silent. As the steel cuffs clicked around his wrists, Shane looked up at me. He looked at my clean, dry hands. He looked at my steady, unblinking eyes, and He finally realized that the weak, ordinary woman he had spent 5 years treating like a shadow had turned into an absolute blade. Natalie, he whispered, his voice raw, his lips trembling. The baby. The baby died a long time ago, Shane, I said, my voice quiet and cool over the sound of the police radios. In another life, you pushed us off the cliff. And in this one, I avoided the pregnancy completely. The doors closed, shutting out his screams forever. The corporate purge of the McClure Group was completed by the end of the month, with the major partners withdrawing their logistics lines, and the Sterling Group's core assets frozen by my father's corporation. The company's valuation plummeted into the dirt. Anya's overseas credentials were revealed to be a complete sham. Without me to quietly correct her spreadsheets and negotiate with the custom authorities behind the scenes, her incompetence resulted in a $3 million customs fine which she tried to pay using the company's emergency credit card, only to find it had already been cancelled. She was terminated for cause, her name blacklisted from every major shipping guild in the region. At the hospital where she had faked her cut finger and her postpartum anxiety, the medical board opened an internal audit into her files. It was revealed she had paid Dr. Zhao $50,000 to write a fake medical report to keep Shane by her side. She was prosecuted for medical fraud and public defamation. She was sentenced to 3 years in a state penitentiary, her fragile, pure beauty turning into a pale, gray uniform under the dim lights of the prison ward. I went back to my hometown, the small, quiet coastal town where the air smelled of salt, pine needles, and wet earth. I bought a small, beautiful cottage near the harbor, where the garden was filled with the white roses my parents had always loved. My hand-embroidered silk art, the one my mother had made before she passed, had been fully restored by a professional textile conservator. It now hung on the main wall of my new, quiet living room, its gold and silver threads catching the morning sun. My phone was off. I had thrown the old SIM card into the East River before I boarded the flight. I was finally truly free. The winter in Orenburg was long and quiet. For 6 months, the high society of the city spoke of nothing but the tragedy of the McClure family. The billionaire heir had been stripped of his company, his wealth, and his status. His personal properties had been repossessed, and he lived in a tiny, rented room near the industrial canal, his face pale and sunken, his clothes rumpled and dirty. He spent his days sitting by his window, his hand clutching a cheap Polaroid picture from 5 years ago, the one showing a 20-year-old girl in a simple blue dress, her face glowing with a bright, silly smile as she leaned against his shoulder in their tiny rented apartment. He had everything he had ever wanted. The money, the status, and the youthful companion he had wanted. But his room was silent, and his bed was cold. He looked at the picture in his hands, his fingers trembling as he pressed his face into the cheap paper. It still smelled of my lavender soap, but the scent was fading, disappearing into the dark of his room like a dying light. Natalie. He wept into his hands. Natalie, please. The winter rain of Seattle was soft, turning the wet asphalt of the streets into a dark, shimmering mirror under the yellow street lamps. I was leaving my office at 6 p.m., my trench coat pulled tight around my neck, my black umbrella held steady against the wind, when a tall, dark figure stepped out from the shadow of the brick building. It was Shane. He looked like a ghost. He was wearing a wet, cheap coat, his face pale and sunken, his eyes bloodshot and wild. He had been seen wandering the streets of our harbor town for 3 days, asking everyone if they had seen a woman named Natalie. He stood in front of my car door, his body shaking with the cold. Natalie, he whispered, his voice raw, broken, and completely stripped of his pride. Please, just let me talk to you. Just for 5 minutes. I have nothing to say to you, Mr. McClure, I said, my hand reaching for the door handle. Move aside. I'm going home. No. He fell to his knees on the rain-slicked pavement, his hands reaching out to grab the hem of my coat, his forehead pressing against my leather boots. Please, Natalie. Just let me hold your hand once. I don't care about the child. I don't care about Haley. I've frozen them out. I'll work 3 jobs. I'll give you everything. Just don't look at me like a stranger. I looked down at the most powerful man in Orenburg, kneeling in the mud at my feet, his hands clutching my shoes like a beggar waiting for scraps. I felt absolutely nothing. No anger, no pity, and no pain. The girl who loved you when she was 20 died on that operating table. Shane, I said, my voice quiet and cool over the sound of the rain. You are just someone who looks like him. I pulled my hand back, climbed into my car, and locked the door. The vehicle pulled away into the bright, clean streets of the harbor town, leaving his shadow behind in the dark. The spring in the harbor town arrived with a brilliant, golden warmth. My family's cottage was warm, the garden filled with the first blooms of the white roses my late parents had loved. I stood on the wooden porch, a warm cup of tea in my hands, watching the yellow Butterflies dance over the flowers under the sun. My hands were strong, my posture relaxed, and my chest was light, free of the suffocating pressure of my past life. Natalie, my assistant Clara, called out from the living room, her voice warm and professional. The final transition files for the new logistics line have been approved. We're launching the first shipping line at noon. Coming, Clara. I smiled, setting my cup down. I walked down the hallway, my heels making a sharp, steady, and confident sound against the polished wooden floor. I looked up at the warm blue sky, took a deep, clean breath, and stepped into the warm light of my future. I was finally truly free.